Can you hear me?
I always want to hit record before we start talking because your first initial, hey, is so genuine. And after that, it's like, hello or hey.
That's funny. It's the radio voice kicking in.
Hey.
Hello.
Well, if you listen to Lee Loving this week, I say it twice. I was like, oh, whoops. You're listening to an imperfect leader. You're listening to an imperfect leader. I'm like, well,
you're still listening to an imperfect leader.
What am I listening? You're listening to an imperfect. Well, I'm glad he said it twice.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. I got lost.
Now, what does he want? 5 stars? Screw that. He kept telling me I was listening.
One of my favorite podcasts would say things about the 5-star review. It would go, please leave a 5-star review. Write any comment you like. You can hate the show. Hate the show. Feel free to hate the show, but leave a 5-star review. It actually has an impact on the algorithm in terms of how this show is consumed, and the actual written words mean nothing.
So we're going to talk about Curtis Cain today. Let me know when you're ready for me to ask you a question. Nothing to do with Curtis yet, but I want to do a Lee Loving. I loved the end of the episode, and I'm committed to asking you that same question as we open today.
Yeah,
you ready?
Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm ready.
I wanted to start with how we finished last week. And if those who are our regular listeners, you know that Lee Loving was our guest last week. And you ended our conversation by asking me a Lee Loving question, which is, what is something that you're proud of, right? What are you proud of right now? And all week, I thought to myself, that is how we are going to open up this week. So let me ask you that Lee Loving question to you, because I think you are so generous in asking questions, and I sometimes forget to ask it back. Like it's not transactional. It's just a genuine relationship type of thing. And I didn't ask it. And all week I'm like, I can't believe how selfish you were. You didn't ask it. So I want to ask because I genuinely care, not just because I kind of like check off something. What is something you're proud of?
Well, you just named, you're like, well, it's a scale. It's imbalanced.
It is. Okay. So you can call me out on anything. That's fine.
That's so funny.
I'm still committed to your response.
I love this question. Like I said in the podcast, I really do. I have started to ask, particularly Leo, every day when he gets home, our kindergartner, what was he proud of today? Gosh. And can I share 2 then? Is it the question I get to? I'm going to share 2. 1, Leo yesterday shared a moment he wasn't proud of. He said, I wasn't proud of myself when I slid down the slide because there was another kid at the bottom of the slide. And I hit that kid in coming down the slide. And it took everything in. I said, I was like that. How do you feel about sharing that with me now? And he said, I wanted to make sure that you knew that I knew what I had done. Basically, that's what he said. He didn't finish that sentence. I wanted to make sure you knew, but that I knew that shouldn't have done that. And I said, I'm so proud of you. This is what the proudest thing I've got today is that you were aware of the behavior, that the thing that you did hurt someone else. You took care of them and you're going to try and rectify that behavior. He's 6. That's amazing.
Amazing. I love that.
Totally amazing. So I'm very proud of that parenting moment. And then the second is this. I had a reflection with my colleague, Greg, who has been on the podcast, my partner, Greg, this morning. The grind of my job has become difficult. It's just time consuming. I am meeting all day long and supporting people all day long. But because of a combination of things, but the podcast being one of them, I have never been more inspired in my job than I am now. I'm very proud of something that's changed in my brain that has moved from doing work to creating. So I'm able to do work. I still do work. And I'm sometimes saying things like my work is getting in the way of my job. And the grind isn't any less hard or any less fulfilling. It's still great. But I'm coming out of it with inspiration and interest in exploring new ideas. I'm proud of this. I can't point to one thing, but I definitely think the podcast has played a significant role. Listening to people's stories about what they've overcome, what are the things that they like to think about as they lead, has me thinking about my own leadership.
I love hearing this. Truly, I mean, first of all, I think we're in season 3 of the podcast, and I think the feedback we've been getting is it's never been better. Like the conversations have always been engaging. It is this piece before and after that I think really deepens the learning, elevates the story and the conversation. So I'm so glad we get to start with what are you proud of? I'm interested in that second piece of what you're proud of. Certainly, I'm interested in your son's own sort of like I am, because my word, what a better world we would all have if from, a 6-year-old is able to remind us that, hey, we make mistakes, we feel a certain something, and we work to figure out a way to make things better for the others first and then ourselves. Like, oh my God, that would be great. And I think it informs the second part, which is so many leaders around the country right now have so many unanswered questions around funding, around programming, around everything from like Medicaid and the kinds of services that can be reimbursed, that are reimbursable, food programs, everything is just spiraling. And everyone is looking to the superintendent as the stabilizing force to say, it's going to be all right. So I think the lesson I've taken from what you just said is to be intentional about finding those pieces that do bring you joy, even if it's hard, that are rewarding, because that will help you get through not just the day, but be able to look towards the future of what you're trying to achieve. And I want to align that to something that our guest this week, Curtis Cain, a friend of mine, as you could probably tell. And he said that the hardest part of the superintendency is knowing that you're not going to get it right every single day. And so as we enter this conversation now, just for every one of us, just to give ourselves permission to get it wrong, like that's okay, to unburden ourselves and recognize the imperfection that comes with just being a human being. So if it's all right, we're going to listen to the conversation and then we're going to come back. Sound good?
100%. I'm always for starting with the interview. Go for it.
All right, here we go. Let us also remind you, you're listening to an Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. Also, if you enjoy this episode and if you've learned something today, please consider following the show or leaving us a 5-star review. This really does help the podcast more than I can say, and it allows us to reach more and more people. And that would just mean the world to us. So thank you so much. Imperfect leaders, are you facing challenges filling open speech-language pathologist positions within your district? Kind of a silly question, because I know you are. MPAT Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with MPAT Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. MPAT Speech, EMPAT Speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools. Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Dr. Curtis Cain, Superintendent of the Rockwood School District, located just outside of St. Louis and one of Missouri's largest school districts. Curtis, my dear friend, it is so good to see you. Welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Peter, it's so good to see you as well.
Thanks. Yeah, you're welcome. Well, first, let's just get the fawning dispensed with. You've been the recipient of a number of recognitions in your career. 2 come to mind. 1, you were the 2022 AASA Superintendent of the Year, and you were Missouri's Superintendent of the Year as well. So I saw a picture of you with multiple medallions on the AASA page. Heavy as the crown, but impressive.
I greatly appreciate that. Look, it was an absolute honor. Quite honestly, not only of a career, but of a lifetime to be able to serve as the National Superintendent of the Year.
Yeah. Well, I'm really curious about that, actually, being named our nation's Superintendent of the Year. And you must have seen some really innovative things as you travel the country. And I wonder what is one that might have come to mind?
A couple of components that I would hope the audience would be aware of is, one, the story of what was going on at that point in time. Now, almost 3 years ago, I saw a lot of commonality in terms of the stresses, the struggles that leaders were working their way through. It was a very unique transition to watch literally in late spring, very early summer of 2020, the work and dedication and drive of educators being celebrated. And literally right around the start of July of the summer of 2020, a very quick 180-degree shift in direction, and how that impacted not only the work of leaders. In so many ways, our work is always secondary. The classroom's the reason we have a school district. And there were so many different feelings and emotions related to that. That carried over in so many different ways, literally until right around 2022. And since you mentioned the National Superintendent of the Year, there's a press conference that occurs that Ed Week hosts, at least at that year, was in the National Press Club, and we were still wearing masks. Now being in 2025 and even thinking about what that meant back then and there is a complete, it just takes you through this kind of portal and this journey of emotions, thoughts, and just reflections on what you experienced. The other two thoughts I have speaks to the grit and persistence that we saw leaders and communities ultimately engaging in. It's interesting. What I don't remember in 2020 or 2021, 2022 was this optionality of, I'm going to check into a global pandemic or the ability to deselect from that experience. It was what it was, and we were working our way through. But we figured out a lot of things that actually leads to my third point, which was it's interesting how necessity can truly erase away the timeline that is needed to scale up towards certain things. One-to-one device initiatives, for example, within school districts and across the nation, we were able to go from thought to how quickly can we get these in our hands to we will even shrink that time frame from in our hands into our students' hands as quickly as we possibly can. And so, yes, but was no longer something that was a part of the lexicon. We figured out how to do things well and do things quickly. And for all the angst, quite honestly, politically and other, at the end of the day, there are still reflections and learnings that I hope we still hold on to when it comes to a global pandemic. But there are absolutely parts of 2020 through about 2022 that nobody in their right mind wants to revisit.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you were to start revisiting them, I might get into the corner of my office here in a fetal position. So let's not go there. However, I do want to actually return to, it's interesting that you put us in the context or the timeline of when you were recognized as Superintendent of the Year, that it was really during this recovery stage. And so what you got to bear witness to, not just locally or regionally, but nationally, really, I don't think anyone's really had a chance to do that unless potentially if you were the chief executive of the United States, who if you were the president, you got to go and visit communities. But otherwise, very few people got to do what you got to do. And to see this story repeat itself from rural, suburban, and urban communities all across the nation of what does recovery look like, and remarking back on, look how quickly we were able to scale up fairly significant initiatives that previously had been a yes, but answer. Yes, but we can't do that because we don't have the money. Yes, we really need to be thinking about the development stages of children. Yes, and all those things are super important. And in this case, it was yes, and we need to provide access to our kids to a great education, so we're going to go do this. And then they did it with really incredible skill.
I think the ingenuity, the drive, but quite honestly, the heart of the educator should never be forgotten, ever be forgotten. There were so many cases where we didn't think, we knew we needed to lay eyes on kids just to not even say anything, just to make sure that they were okay. And that has nothing to do with test scores. That has nothing to do with reimbursement or expenditures from the state, local, wherever it happens to be. It comes from the heart because that's what we do is we make sure kids are okay. And then we wake up every day and we need to be unapologetic and relentless and making sure we're adding as much value and experience as we can to a child's educational experience on a daily basis. I think that we also, although people expressed it in a variety of ways, quickly began to be reminded of the fact of how important a puzzle piece we are to communities. Schools, school districts, and ultimately communities are all in the same ecosystem. And when you impact one segment or portion of that ecosystem, there's impact and reverberation across the entirety of the ecosystem. Regardless of where it comes from, regardless of why it exists, we are never in isolation. And we need to always be remembered and just mindful of remembering that and be mindful of that. Not just educators. I think a citizenry and communities as a whole need to be aware of that.
If you're just joining us, my guest today is Dr. Curtis Cain, Superintendent of the Rockwood School District. Curtis, you and I have been friends for many years. In fact, when actually think about this, our friendship was forged in many different ways, but one certainly is whenever we were expecting snow in mid-Missouri, I could count on a text from you asking, all right, what does the weather look like? So for those who are listening, like you were about 100 miles east of me. And so whenever we were getting, you would be like confident it was coming to you too. So I always giggle, like I knew I was going to get something from you. But this question is a long one. And, actually what I'm going to do, I'm going to break it into two parts. So part one, when you started at Rockwood as the superintendent, you embarked on a listen, lead, and learn tour. And lots of superintendents out there are starting in new districts. And so I was curious about one particularly impactful insight that you gained from that process, and then how it has influenced your own leadership decisions.
So that was all in mid-process, like literally being National Superintendent of the Year. Personally, I'm just going to go ahead and share this because you're a friend and you were there to be of support. The same day I found out I was National Superintendent of the Year, my father passed away that same morning. My mother did not tell me until that evening. She found the strength and fortitude to know I will wait and he will understand before I let him know this news. I'm leaving one district, heading to a new community, selling a house, purchasing a new home, transitioning a fifth grade student that had a number of emotions about leaving what he had known to be home to head to a new district. There was a ton that was going on personally and professionally that first year. But I think that when I look back, I have a lot of thoughts on that year. But that transition, I had been in my previous role as superintendent for 9 years, and I had forgotten the amount of energy that is needed to get up and going for people to know who you are. It's great that you have the stamp of National Superintendent of the Year. I'm so humbled and honored. I'm the first superintendent in Missouri to ever be named. I truly believe I will not be the last superintendent in the state of Missouri to be named, but that stamp is great and fantastic. But at the end of the day, people want to know who you are. I also believe that in most cases, we are blessed with having 2 ears and 1 mouth. And especially that first year, it helps to use them in that proportion. Listen, people will honestly, they will tell you more than you can ask. Just listen. Just listen. Don't overcommit. Just listen. Those are very helpful components. But at the end of the day, people want to know who you are, like as a person. And I'm not saying you have to disclose DNA sequencing and all these other facts, but they want to get a feel for who you are as chief executive of a school district. Because one fact is true. You are being given the privilege of taking care of their baby. And I don't care if she's a 5-year-old that's being dropped off that first day of school, and everybody remembers what that feeling, that experience that you go through in terms of feeling as a parent, in terms of doing that. Or it's an 18-year-old about to cross the stage at graduation with a full beard, right? That is still someone's baby. And they want to know, they know you're not superhuman. They typically know you aren't superhuman, but they want to know that you have the best interests of not only their child, but every other child in that respective organization at heart. And that it's first and foremost. And staff want to get a good feel of who you are as well. And it's not so much what you say, it's that plus how you go about saying it. Because the truth is, your actions will precede your footsteps.
I think you are right that people want to know your heart. I say your heart, but it is, they want to know your beliefs, your values, your principles. And I don't mean ideology, but more about, are you about kids first? And then how does that look? And you and I have talked over the years, and I know we've talked about how do you prepare kids for this ever-changing world? And it is more complex than it's ever been. And I read something that it was a conversation that you had with Education Week, and you were talking about remote learning. And again, this is around the same time that you were named National Soup of the Year. And so you talked about, look, it potentially could be a viable choice option that we can deploy within our school operations. And then I started to think more about, and you said kids are having to master technology at the next level, whether that's the world of work, the military, college campus, community college. We need to provide them with a space to master that domain area as well, which I thought was a really smart way of saying, look, we're meeting an immediate need right now, and we're also recognizing we have an obligation to our kids. Again, you're going to look and judge me based on, am I preparing your children for their future? And so I actually just got curious because Rockwood was a district that my school district modeled a couple of innovative practices from. So the geometry and house building course was there before you arrived. And then there was like an algebra and entrepreneur class. And so I just kept looking at your district as this innovative place. And I'm kind of curious, how have you leveraged what you said about technology? And then, how are you using it maybe differently than maybe you were previously using it?
A great question. It's interesting as I think about the timestamp of that particular quote or series of quotes from that article. And there's this thing called artificial intelligence, I'm sure you've probably heard of, really dealing with two ends of the extreme. We actually have a year-long investigation and an examination of what's happening with cell phone use and smartwatch use within our schools, and really having some meaningful conversation and in many ways, a dry run, so to speak, of not that they are banned, but that they aren't seen and heard during the course of instruction throughout the course of the school day. For a variety of reasons, I am in favor of making sure that students have access in case something were to happen. But let's be respectful not only of yourself, your peer in the classroom, but also the teacher. Let's put the devices away. It's been really well received. Of course, there are some teenagers that say, how dare you? But by and large, I have been very pleasantly surprised by the reaction of our students and understanding, yes, this can be a source of distraction. At the end of the day, I think students understand that. On the other end of the spectrum is artificial intelligence. And I could be wrong, but this smacks of the Gutenberg press. I think it was in 1440 back in Germany. This is a game change. This is a sea change to how we are going to go about learning. And actually, my chief information officer shared an analogy that some people aren't going to understand if they don't follow the Marvel universe at all. But this is going to be an amplifier. I am not sure it's going to, in fact, be like the Terminator or this negative component, right? I think what it can morph into is Iron Man's suit, an amplification of what is from the inside in terms of the user, so to speak, of AI. But just assume that there's no need for students to understand what this means, what it looks like, how to effectively and appropriately leverage artificial intelligence. I don't believe is going to be a plan for success moving forward. So I think it's very important that we find a way to wrestle with this in a safe environment, including using safe forms of artificial intelligence, because there are dire consequences to not understanding how to use AI on a college campus, using AI on a college campus, and then you are expelled from said college campus. We have to find appropriate means, ways, and activities, examples, spotlights, right? Opportunities for our students to leverage this to enhance the learning process, not to replicate the learning process.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important to note. I've been traveling the country talking to different SUPs, and in some cases, they'll tell me stories of teachers who will say, well, this is a violation of the student conduct code if you were to use AI as a thought partner, and others who really push back and say, wait a second, that's a yes, but kind of response to what we know to be true. This is going to be, and already is, a major part of their lives. And so why wouldn't you allow, particularly a second language learner, where English may not be their first language, to be able to demonstrate, here's the prompt I used to clean up my grammar so that you can see my brilliance, as opposed to being distracted by the mechanics of English as as a disruption to what I'm actually wanting to write about. Or for a child who may not have had access to some higher level classes in the past, to be able to say, here are the things I'm thinking about, and here's the outline it generated. Here's my independent thought that I wrote. But here I'm turning it in so you can see exactly what I used to help me make my first draft, just like a writing tutor might do for me. Absolutely. So I keep struggling with the yes, but they're not authentically doing it themselves. Okay, what about the family that hires a writing tutor and the kid goes for an hour and works on that together? You're okay with that, right? This is what technology is doing for you. Or having a child who receives speech language services to be able to produce and practice and then get feedback, and it to be able to generate a report on like what you did well and what you need to still work on. Amazing to be able to replace in some cases, so I guess substitute, where there may have not have been access for a kid. Anyway, obviously, you just mentioned something that really just, for me, is like lancing a wound. I'm just going to keep going because I don't understand why but I'm not practicing as a soup. So I'm curious to know, what that sort of the political piece of the internal system and the pushback that teachers might have about it.
I also think it's important to embrace some of that pushback. It's different. The cell phone was different. I'm not even sure how you do the job of adulting without a cell phone right now, just from a calendar management perspective. But, that was a PDA not that long ago, which was a traditional journal just a little bit earlier than that. And so there's this constant evolution that we are all having to work our way through. And I do not believe that AI is going to replace highly qualified teachers that engage in the art and science of the thousands of decisions that our teachers make on a daily basis. I believe it can enhance. And so let's embrace some of the discomfort and let's figure out a most responsible, most balanced, and most appropriate path forward.
How does the term an imperfect leader resonate for you?
This is my 12th year as a superintendent. Here are a couple of thoughts that pop in my head. I think that leadership is in fact a journey. I think that education is a calling, but I do believe that the superintendency is a lifestyle. I think that there's this constant learning, evolving, adaptation, recentering, recharging, questioning kind of cycle or loop that superintendents engage in. I think that those that do this work the best don't do it by themselves. They recognize and understand the value of the team, but it is a combination of both art and science. And I think that the season or the time that you are in also impacts how you go about engaging in this work. And to be very frank with you, Dr. Stiepelman, I also think this is an era where it is it isn't. It is a contact sport. I think if you're willing to walk into the arena right now, you have to be willing to lose it too. If you're looking for 100% consensus and approval in any decision, you probably are not sitting in the right chair. And I also think that you have to have a North Star. You have to have a willingness to walk away from certain situations and contexts depending upon what is being asked and how it's being asked. But you also have to understand that in so many ways, there are more eyes than you will ever be able to count that look toward you to figure out if it is okay, if it's not okay, are we headed in the right direction, headed in the wrong direction? And there's a weight and gravitas that comes with that. And the hardest part of the superintendency is knowing you are not going to get it right every single day.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being. And I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of an Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. We're back for segment 2 of an Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest today is Dr. Curtis Cain, the superintendent of the Rockwood School District. And in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision they made, and then we discuss it. So what happened?
Well, depending upon the geography of the listener, some will have an understanding of this and others may or may not. It's a snow day gone wrong. In which case, here's what simply happened. There were clear projections, and I'm not going to cite sources, but there were clear projections of snow that was supposed to miss, and it in fact hits, and it hit in a way and phase that was earlier than was anticipated, and it led to an absolute mess. And outside of pandemic or a situation with an active, even threat as relates to an active shooter, something of that ilk, there is nothing less popular, less demoralizing than when these situations in fact happen. But projections are not always accurate. And at the end of the day, the good, the bad, and the in-between of the superintendent still means you are responsible. And so how do you work your way through that is an ongoing process for those that choose to sit in the chair. There's going to be something that you have no control over, or things that you do have control over, in which you aren't going to get it right. So what do you do as you move forward?
Man, I mean, you're bringing up something. I mean, I'm thinking like 2016. I think I can remember the date too, December 16, 2016, where we had this like frozen mist, the fog that came through and just absolutely like paralyzed the entire city. And we didn't get kids home till like 1 a.m. because there was just, you could not move. Everyone was stranded and cars were crashed everywhere. And my favorite story of that day though was like, we finally got a bus out of a middle school at 9:30 at night, and this kid like Joshua, I'm making up his name, Joshua misses the bus. And they go, Joshua, what are you doing? The bus left. He's like, I know, but we're flying drones in the gymnasium. This is so much fun. I don't want to go home. Oh my God. And then I think about the year that I had armed ourselves with 2-hour delays, and I just kept calling 2-hour delays. And then that drove the community incredibly crazy. And as you were saying snow day, my thought was, they called a snow day and the snow didn't materialize. But in this case, you didn't call a snow day and the snow materialized. And wow. I mean, did I capture that right?
You did. Actually, many districts had a professional development day that day, and we did not. We were one of
the
selected few number of districts that in fact had school. And
oh my,
get buses back up and rolling and getting kids back as quickly and as safely as we possibly could. But I tell you what, it just doesn't feel good that day. It is more than akin to playing soccer without shin guards. Is the best way to describe how that.
Oof. What would you say got overlooked? I mean, you did say forecasts were inaccurate. So that's a system-wide, just that was overlooked. What other pieces do you think were overlooked?
Look, at the end of the day, Peter, parents don't care that forecasts are overlooked. That's the truth. And so how can you go about some of that decision-making differently in terms of anticipating what's going to be happening? Even the process of early dismissal, which makes very few happy. People want to know that their kids are going to be safe. Staff want to know that they and their families are going to be safe, or they're going to be able to safely get home to their families. It is an emotionally charged situation when you're dealing with inclement weather. And I think it is always going to be. It's interesting how your literally geographic home, I was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. People raise all kinds of interesting comments and feedback in terms of what you are used to growing up in terms of conditions and what people are accustomed to experiencing now. And I also think that I would say that the guardrails on this have evolved over time. And I think that we will continue to have to flex and morph around the almost amorphic nature of what expectations happen to be when it comes to precipitation. But we learn. We ask our students to learn and to fail forward. At the end of the day, we as leaders, whether we like it or not, need to be prepared for the fact that we will have to do so as well.
Well, I want to ask you about that in a moment. The question I like to ask before that, though, is what did you learn about relationships? What new relationships were formed as a result of this?
I think that there's this currency that you don't want to necessarily burn through when it comes to relationships. You will also have folks that will understand, sometimes quietly, but they'll understand and have an appreciation for the way, literally the gravitas of those decisions that you have to make. What you will find is that thoughts, feelings, reflections can change over time. But the longer you are in a place, the more people have a gut feel for how you react, how you think. But I will go back to what I've said earlier. If you're waiting for 100% approval and 100% yes, I'm not sure this is the right chair to sit in. You have to understand that it's just not the world that we live in right now. So you have options, right? To live with your head above ground in the real world, or to bury it in the sand. And I choose to keep my head above ground and do the best I can on a daily basis.
You say something interesting there, which is that, if you're in your first years as soup, they don't know you yet. And so you're making decisions, and then they're writing their own narratives about your decision-making process. And so when you're in your third or fourth year or beyond, they have a better idea of how, and you as the leader have a better understanding of the threshold of that community in terms of what their own expectations are. And so, so I wonder, as people are entering the superintendency, entering a new community, how that becomes one of their own better understandings about snow day decisions, or any decision, but certainly there's a period of the year where you're just every day, you sleep so poorly because all you're doing is monitoring forecasts. Even though you've got lots of people in a large district who are doing that, at the end of the day, it's coming back to you. So you're kind of monitoring and looking at that.
It is a very light, non-restful sleep. Yes, I would agree.
Yeah. What could you have done differently?
had you actually be 100 miles to the west so I could have a better idea.
I was going to say, did you call me that day? Was that one of the days? Okay, so it was more recent than that. Oh yeah.
It was more
Sorry.
recent than that.
Sorry, man. I'm sorry I moved.
No, look, I think there is no easy, quick solution, because if there had been, it would have already been selected. And that was just last school year. So it would have been selected last school year. Just like we ask our students, sometimes in life we have to, and our own kids, you will learn to be able to pick yourself back up. You got knocked down, pick yourself back up and go get back in again.
So you had mentioned something earlier in this reflection about failing forward. We ask our kids to learn from lessons. And so always at the end is the question of, well, what was something that was good that came out of this? And so it sounds like you've made some adjustments to how you do this work. And I'm curious, so what was good that came out of this?
Specifically out of the snow day?
Yeah, I mean, but sometimes those instances, that learning bleeds into and stitches into other decision making that you have to do. So I'm kind of curious.
I am, in general, not as stoic as people think I am. There's a wicked, dry sense of humor that some are availed to. Maybe theoretically, I'm literally on a podcast with someone that understands that. I am more comfortable in my own skin as now one of the quote unquote old dudes of the superintendency, at least in the region. You know, every district that I've served in, I've had a child or children in the school district itself. I'm very mindful of what that means. Our two kids react very differently to that reality. I think people lose sight of the fact that I'm superintendent to everyone else, but that is secondary in the eyes of your kids. Like, dad is primary function and role. And they hear more criticism than I think people sometimes know.
That we even know. I only learned, oh my gosh, my kid's senior year, his picture, you have a quote that you're allowed to put in there. And his quote was, "No, I don't know if we're going to have a snow day." Like, I was like, oh my God, how many texts and DMs he must have gotten that he just spared me. That must have been so overwhelming for him. I had no idea. Like, just, wow. Yeah, you're right. So that is good. I mean, it goes back to the relationship piece about a relationship with our own families and then with others. It's just to know, to recognize to some extent, everything that they carry for us as well, and that we should be mindful of that.
Look, Peter, it's the biggest piece of skin I can put in the game, right? Literally, a piece of your heart's floating around in school. Whether it's daughter or son, right? Your child is in that school district. And in both cases, it's not a contractual obligation. It's an active choice that has been made, not by just this Dr. Cain. It's been a family decision by a couple, right? That we have opted to do so. It speaks to my thoughts and our value as it relates to public education, but also belief within an organization as well. It's nice to talk about it. This is actually being about it. And as much effort as I have put into making it a non-weird deal, it's still a dynamic. I mean, I promise you, at the end of the day, it's still a dynamic. And so our children have handled it very differently in terms of embracing their father if they see him in school. But looking back, I can tell you they've had an appreciation and do recognize how rare a situation and opportunity it's been.
What advice would you give to an aspiring superintendent?
I would say, never, ever sit in an interview unless you are willing to, in fact, accept the position. If you're sitting in an interview and you're not sure if you're going to accept the position, you haven't done your homework, which means you really shouldn't be sitting in the interview. I would say there are points, goal theory, right? There are hills that you're willing to die on, right? I don't know how you want to describe it, but you have to know what your internal kind of mechanisms and guardrails are for. This fits me or it does not. You have to understand what that looks like. Some publicly broadcast them, others don't, but you need to know what you know in that regard. I would say an interview is a two-way process. As much as they are feeling you out, you need to feel them out as well. I said one earlier that the superintendency is a lifestyle and it's not a position. And I wish I could tell you'll be able to be there for every single meaningful personal scheduling conflict or scheduling priority that you will have on your family's calendar. I can tell you that. I can also just flat out tell you that's not true. You have to understand that there's going to be an impact. Conversely, I also believe that you have every right to be a parent if you have children that are school age and that you'll find a way around it. You'll find a way to work through it and somehow find a degree of balance as well. I will say that you will evolve over time for that aspiring leader and embrace that. There are going to be times when you skin a knee, bruise a rib, whatever it happens, sometimes lose a tooth. Like that is what leadership is sometimes. The popular decision isn't always the right decision. You are going to be questioned. In today's world, you are going to be harmed. You will search to find work more meaningful than this. And I can't think of a more important time to be not just a superintendent, but to be a leader in the field of education than right now. If there has ever been a time in which this longstanding investment and source of pride in public education has ever been needed, I would argue that it's right now. And one last bit of advice for superintendents or aspiring superintendents. There is some work that you cannot delegate. And when it comes to the Board of Education, developing true and meaningful relationships simply cannot be delegated. That's work that you must engage in. And never, ever, ever give up on a board member. They change over time. And if we're going to be honest with ourselves, we change over time as well.
That's great advice. Our guest today was Dr. Curtis Cain, Superintendent of the Rockwood School District. And Curtis, this has been a real joy. I don't know if I purposely put you off for a couple of years, but I think part of it was, I don't know if I was ready early on doing the podcast, whether or not I would have been able to do this well. And I'm so glad that we got to do this a few years later, because I also have changed. And you talk about taking over a school district during a time of recovery. You talk about 2 ears, 1 mouth, which is, I think, one piece of wisdom that people are really going to take away with them. You talk about the art and the science of leading, and just more than anything, just how important it is that we listen to the people that we get to serve, and then we listen to ourselves to remember that we are human and that this is really human-centered leadership. So thank you so much for giving me your time today.
Peter, it is always good to see you, my friend. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, let's talk about Curtis Cain.
I'd love it.
What do you want to start with? Can I actually start with something that you said?
That I said, sure.
Yeah. I loved what you said about AI and your particular example as it relates to a writing tutor or reading tutor was such a nice, concrete example of the ways in which privileges allow for access that others don't have. And when tech catches up or creates new and even more like uncomfortable ways of approaching schooling, I'll just stick to schooling, we do these things where we're like, yep, get rid of it, out forever, never use it.
Yeah, I mean, right, when you've worked in schools, I've worked in schools, we often try to look at like the function of a behavior. Why is something happening? And what I've noticed, even I go to these back to school nights for my own kid, and you hear things like, they may not use AI, they may not use ChatGPT. And I'm thinking to myself, what's the function of this behavior? What are you trying to get, or what are you trying to get away from? And in this case, it's like, oh, I need to feel, at least this is my thought, was like the crux of that issue is I need the kids to need me to give them feedback. And if they're leveraging technology to do that, I worry someone's going to determine that I'm not needed, and or I don't trust that the feedback that they're getting is as good as what I can provide. And maybe that's totally true. However, I also know if you're responsible for 150 kids, you may not be able to give kids the kind of timely feedback. And sometimes it's very low level. Something like ChatGPT can actually provide.
Right.
I appreciate that.
I thought it was a really helpful way for some folks to sort of get their arms around it. And then it makes me think of like, oh, this is an opportunity that we could open up a dialogue of the ways that we could use it and the ways in which it would not be helpful, and make sure that, try to figure out like, well, how do we assure that it's being used in a way that's really supportive to our students?
I think the same thing happened when phones first came on the scene, like in 2007 and in 2008. And our initial thought was, no, you may not bring them here. That we will not do phones. And then in 2010, we started to say like, oh, actually, maybe we'll bring your own device. It's not such a bad thing. And we still struggled. We put a policy in place that said it's got to be used for educational reasons, and we just didn't realize how to do that. And some teachers were marvelous at it, and it just was so like the jobs we do already in teaching and administration are so overwhelming. Right. And now you want me to spend a little bit of time to figure out how to use this? Like, no, just don't bring it.
I think this conversation frames something that Curtis said that I really want to reflect back and make sure people hear, especially aspiring superintendents. This conversation makes me think of the roles in which something that a superintendent would play a role in, but principals would be a part of that, would be the decision maker, would be decision making in this. Teachers or teacher leaders would be a decision maker in the use of AI. You might have parent committees or student committees weighing in and giving all that kind of stuff. When he said everybody's job basically is clear, but the superintendent's job is a lifestyle.
Yeah.
I thought this is maybe my favorite description of the superintendency I've ever heard.
He said it and my brain twitched or like sort of buzzed because I had not heard it that way. And it made total sense. Absolutely. It made total sense. Yep.
So good. So tell me, as a superintendent, what are the ways in which your lifestyle, your daily life, you're with your family and your like work and personal, in what ways was your life impacted or changed as a result of being a superintendent?
When I first became superintendent, the first thing I was told by the director of communications was, you have to be famous in this town. That is your job, to be everywhere. And that means that you start to, your family sees you a lot less because you're doing the soapbox derby. You're getting into this car and running down the hill, against the university president. You're going on these chamber trips and making sure that you're engaging everybody in the community to care about the schools. You're going to the biggest rivalry basketball games, and every quarter you're sitting with a different group. The kids from the home team, the kids from the visitor team, the parents from the home team, the parents of the visitor team, and talking to everybody and high-fiving and clapping for everybody. Everybody's a winner. It is a lifestyle. It is all encompassing. You can't go to the supermarket without somebody stopping you, wanting to talk to you, and you can't say, I'm so sorry. Everybody is the most important person to you, as they should be, because you serve the community. It is a lifestyle, and it's exhausting. I mean, he said, I think his full quote was like, leadership is in fact a journey, and that education is a calling. And I believe the superintendency is a lifestyle, and it's this constant learning, evolving, and adaptation. And it's taking all of those in the moment and then pushing you out into the public eye. I mean, I couldn't go to a restaurant with somebody knowing that I was there. You were always on. And that's a lifestyle.
I mean, it's so fascinating. To hear you say that is probably what so many other famous folks go through. And
you're famous in your small town, right? You're a big fish in a small pond. That's it.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what I would say as a lifestyle. I thought Curtis is a very thoughtful leader. He is got great presence. And at the same time, he really demonstrates wisdom because he doesn't feel that he needs to be the one speaking. He is sort of your model superintendent because you ask questions and then you listen. I've been thinking about that a lot. You've really, the listening piece. And so Curtis says, right, that prioritizing listening, and especially in a new role, but like allowing leaders to understand their community and make those informed decisions. And I really think he not just says it, he means it. He's a good listener.
He said, I'll tell you what he said. Besides, I think most folks have heard the 2 ears, 1 mouth comment or quote.
I hadn't. I was like, huh.
Oh, that's fascinating. It's an American Indian quote. The other idea, what he said, especially in that first year, but it helps to use the ears and mouth in that proportion, more ears than mouth. Listen, this is what he said. People will tell you more than you can ask. Just listen. Just listen. Don't overcommit. Just listen. There are very helpful components, but at the end of the day, people do just want to know who you are like as a person, There, that's what it said. And it made me think of my favorite quote.
Before you tell me that quote, were you just smiling when you heard him say that? Really?
It's so good. The number of times that he just said, just listen, slow down, listen to the person in front of you. They're brilliant. They're amazing. It's one of my favorite things. I just love it. I truly love it.
So what quote did it make you think of?
I have a quote that my uncle gave me. It's a Kafka quote, Franz Kafka quote. And I use it all the time for myself. This is what helps me slow down and listen. And it takes the statement, just listen, up to the next level. The quote says, "You do not need to leave your room. Remain sitting at your table and listen. Do not even listen. Simply wait. Do not even wait. Be quiet, still, and solitary. The world will freely offer itself to you to be unmasked. It has no choice. It will roll in ecstasy at your feet."
That is so powerful. I was writing almost like a little free write as you were saying that. That's awesome.
This is what I'm aspiring to. This is what I work to do. Slow down and listen. And not, it can't help but do it. The people in front of you can't help but want to show you who they are, what they care about, what they value. That's what Curtis said that really, really touched me.
I'm going to let the world freely offer itself to me. And I think I can't do that unless we end our conversation today. So we're going to end our conversation today.
That was good. Smooth landing.
Oh, man.
Smooth landing.
Thank you so much again.
Neither you nor I can actually land a plane after a Kafka quote. We're going to just leave it at Kafka.
There it is. Exactly.
Well said.
There's not much more to say. So, yeah. No. I'm like, can I make a metamorphosis joke? What can I do? No, nothing. Let's just say you've been listening to an Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I am Peter Stiepelman.
And I'm Jamie Lanzan.
And we will see you next week.
See you then.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.